Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sitting here Tuesday morning, January 21st. Ryan Day, the Ohio State Buckeyes, your national champs. Now, many of y'all know, even the Ohio State fans who've been rocking with the boys for a while, that I'm a Michigan fan. We've gone back and forth for years at this point. Where I got to start here is for 10 minutes, and it's only going to be 10 minutes. I'm going to take off the Michigan hat and let's talk about what we've seen from this Ohio State football team in the 2024 year. Because you have to start with giving flowers to that Ohio State senior class. I'm talking JTT, I'm talking Jack Sawyer, I'm talking Travion Henderson, I'm talking Emeka, talking Tyleek, talking Denzel Burke. Probably left out a few other important names as well. This was a class that came in 2021 and had sky high expectations in terms of what this group was going to do for Ohio State. And I don't think it's unfair to say for 3.5 years, it was largely disappointing for Ohio State fans, right? 0-4 against Michigan. You hadn't won a national championship. You're coming off probably what is one of the more tough losses to swallow against Michigan in the end of November. This team didn't flinch. In fact, what they did, instead of flinching and instead of folding and instead of not being their best form in the playoffs, they rallied and they became a team that we saw in the college football playoffs that there just wasn't a team that could match that level. And you talk about one of what I appreciate in terms of what NIL has brought college football. We're getting to see a lot of really good football players stick around for one more year. And a lot of people will talk about Ohio State $20 million roster. What they used most of their money on was, they went out and got a guy like Judkins. They went out and got a guy like Will Howard or Caleb Downs. They went out and grabbed some really good additions in the transfer portal. But you make no mistake about it, the bulk of that roster, a lot of the players that you can credit with this Ohio State team in 2024, they were fourth-year guys, a lot of which very well could be playing on Sundays right now, deciding to come back for one more year. Really disappointing loss to Michigan in the end of November, and they didn't flinch. They became their best form, and they, I think, undisputed. And again, Michigan hats off. It's only 8 more minutes now. That was the best team in college football that we saw the last 4 games in the college football playoffs. They ran the gauntlet, and they played Tennessee, a 9 seed that I thought was a better than a 9 seed kind of team. Then they played Oregon, blew them off the football field. They played Texas, and then they played Notre Dame team that had won 13 football games straight. You got to start with giving credit to Ryan Day and this Ohio State group of seniors that rallied together and became a very good football team in the college football playoffs over the last 4 games. Secondly, you got to give a ton of credit to Will Howard. Look, I don't even know if Ohio State fans had that kind of expectation in terms of that version of Will Howard that we saw in the college football playoffs. That was not just a stopgap quarterback that you brought in to say, hey, you just got to be a game manager. We're going to put a really good football team around you. That wasn't the case for Will Howard in the college football playoffs. He was elite all 4 games that we saw in the college football playoffs. I mean, he was 15-15 to start that game against Notre Dame. You haven't seen many better quarterback performances over the last 4 games in some really big games than what Will Howard brought him, including what he did with his legs. And I think lastly, one of the more underwritten storylines that we saw with Ohio State here, that offensive line, specifically a guy like Donovan Jackson kicking out to left tackle, there were some growing pains early when they had to shuffle the deck. It was by far my biggest question mark for Ohio State going into the playoffs. I think a lot of Ohio State fans would probably concur. They were really dang good. I mean, they started playing a Tennessee front that I thought might be able to have their way. That was not the case against Tennessee. And they just kept getting better as a unit. Donovan Jackson, an All-American caliber guard, goes out to left tackle, was probably Ohio State's best offensive lineman through the college football playoffs. I mean, graded out at an elite level. A guy that should be playing guard went out to left tackle, saw some really good edge rushes over the last couple of weeks, played really good football. And it starts with the seniors, starts with Ryan Day at the top. It starts with what Will Howard did. It starts with that offensive line and how they performed down the stretch. There are a lot of areas where you look at this Ohio State team and say, you got to give them their flowers. Now, I want to get into the game a little bit as well, before we do, and as always, Ohio State fans, college football fans, Michigan fans, you might not want to be listening to this. I ain't going to listen to this either. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. It truly has been a blast to cover this sport in 2024. And the amount of support from all sorts of different fan bases, it means the world to the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into what we saw in this football game, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Let's start with this Ohio State offense that did not punt the football until Notre Dame did not come up with a stop through the first 3 quarters of this football game. This is a Notre Dame defense that was elite. And really the whole season, especially in the back half of the season, especially in the college football playoffs. And the big question mark here coming in was, could Notre Dame play the man coverage that they played against teams previously and beat this Ohio State team? What I think was interesting storyline, that's all anybody wanted to talk about, was Notre Dame playing man coverage against these Ohio State wide receivers. Notre Dame came out playing a lot of zone. And you give Ryan Day and Coach Kelly a lot of credit in terms of getting some zone beaters to get them out of zone and get them back to playing man, right? They were flooding zones. They were ripping the flats. They got Notre Dame back to playing man coverage. The question was, can Notre Dame play man coverage and have success against these Ohio State wide receivers? And the answer to that was very clearly no, right? And you look at Ohio State and say that they offered, from a wide receiver standpoint, I'm not sure if you could find a secondary in the country that could play man coverage on these wide receivers and expect to win. There's just too much talent. Like, whether you decide to put a safety over Jeremiah Smith, Mecca, Cardinal Tate, they're working on ones. When you have that much talent at the wide receiver position, it becomes extremely hard to play man coverage because you're going to have a guy that wins their matchup on every single play. Whether it was Jeremiah Smith, whether it was Mecca, whether it was Cardinal Tate, they had answers for when Notre Dame played zone. They had the answers because they have the dudes when Notre Dame went to man coverage. That's kind of where it started. It looked like Ohio State was just a little bit faster, a little bit more juice on the outside. And quite frankly, you can credit Ohio State winning a national championship largely for that reason. And you go back to the Oregon game in the Rose Bowl, that was the biggest storyline. Oregon's linebackers, Oregon's safeties, they just couldn't play in space and run with this Ohio State talent. Ohio State had superior talent on the outside in comparison to any team in the country. There just wasn't going to be defenses that could run with Jeremiah Smith, guys like Emeka, and guys like Cardinal Tate. And when you saw Ohio State lose that football game to Michigan and make that pivot to, hey, we got a ton of playmakers on the outside, it's players, not plays, and we got to get the football into their hands, that is when you saw the best version of this Ohio State offense. And then you also got to give credit for running the football. 41 carries for 215 yards, averaged over 5 yards per carry. Quinshon Judkins between the tackles in the red zone. So difficult to stop against the Notre Dame front seven that was a little bit undermanned, right? They've gone through some injuries. They're a little bit of a smaller unit. Ohio State went to a little bit of bully ball in terms of the running the football, using Will Howard as well with his legs. You could tell that it was just kind of big bodies moving little bodies in the run game, letting these running backs get to the second level. You did see Notre Dame have some uncharacteristic bad run fits from the linebackers. When you do that against running backs like Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, you were going to have to pay for it. Notre Dame did. Then you go to the Ohio State defense. That was as ideal of a script that Notre Dame could have written out for that first drive. They go 18 plays, they go 10 minutes game time, and go score a touchdown. Just kind of running the football with Riley Leonard. The question was, hey, is that going to be something that works for Notre Dame for 4 quarters? We kind of saw it didn't. Ohio State's defense, and we said it's really hard to run on Ohio State's defense because they're so solid between the tackles with that defensive line in front seven, but they're also so fast that if you want to get into the perimeter, guys like Cody Simon, guys like Caleb Downs can really stretch out plays. Notre Dame could not run the football consistently. They had 23 carries for only 53 yards. You kind of made Riley Leonard in this Notre Dame offense become a little bit one-dimensional. Not only because they struggled to run the football in this football game, but also they went down pretty big early, and you kind of had to throw if you wanted to come back. It was too little too late. You saw Notre Dame kind of start to put it together and get some chunk plays in the passing attack late in the fourth quarter, but it just wasn't enough. And you got to give this Ohio State team a ton of credit in terms of, hey, you knew the game plan. if you could get Notre Dame off schedule and force Riley Leonard to drop back in the pocket, push the ball down the field, a couple of different things. One, are their wide receivers good enough? Outside of Jaden Greathouse, you can tell that was an issue for Notre Dame. They didn't have enough playmakers on the outside that could create separation and win their matchups. I think, secondly, the offensive line holding up in pass protection. That this is an Ohio State defense. You talk about one of the biggest storylines in terms of Ohio State becoming a national championship team. That defensive line was taking over football games. They took over the football game against Oregon. They largely I wouldn't say took over the football game against Texas, but certainly won that matchup against one of the best offensive lines you saw. One of the big question marks is, hey, this Notre Dame offense, they can run block their tails off. They've struggled in times in pass protection. Now, it wasn't necessarily highlighted because Notre Dame has been able to run the football pretty consistently in a lot of their other matchups. Ohio State took away the run game, forced this offensive line to hold up in pass protection, forced Riley Leonard to do something that he's not as comfortable doing, that sitting in the pocket, pushing the ball down the field. And you force these wide receivers to go make plays down the field. And outside of Jaden Greathouse, you didn't have a ton of answers. This Ohio State team, the form of Ohio State that we saw in the college football playoffs was just another level. And there wasn't really a team that could match it. Now, the question, we knew they were playing on another level when we watched that Tennessee game. And then the question was, can they play like that for the next 3 football games, go win a national championship? They certainly played against Oregon. That was probably the best version of Ohio State you saw all year. They played very good football against Texas, played very good football against Notre Dame, and they get it done. And you talk about Ryan Day. Wild story, right? And look, really, as a Michigan fan, I'll put my Michigan fan hat back on real quick. There were a lot of Ohio State fans that were calling for Ryan Day's job, which I think to people outside of the rivalry might sound a little bit crazy, right? Ryan Day has been awesome as a head coach. He's won a lot of football games. He doesn't lose football games he's not supposed to lose. That game means a lot. I think we all know it, Michigan and Ohio State fans. I'm guilty of calling for Jim Harbaugh's job when he would routinely lose to Ohio State as well. Even though you knew the program was going in the right direction, that's more than a game. And there's a lot of people in the national media that get up here and say, hey, you're an idiot for calling for Ryan Day's job. Look, as a Michigan fan, I get where the Ohio State fans were coming from. And you got to give a lot of credit to Ryan Day in terms of, hey, he knows the pressure. And he's been around this, right? He knows the pressure that's on that football game. And I think the Ohio State fans know it too. He gets off the mat. They go become the team that we all knew they could be in the playoffs. And they get it done in our national champs. Big Ten, 2 straight national champions. Putting the Michigan hat back on. We on y'all going into 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Congratulations to the Ohio State fans. Again, I hate to say it, but this was a team that was deserving of a national championship. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.